The head of the U.S. intelligence agency, CIA, says Daesh terrorist group has the capability to make chemical weapons. Now, John Brennan also confirms that terrorists have used such weapons in the past. CIA chief says the ISIL terrorists have access to chlorine and mustard gas agents and can make use of them to make internationally banned weapons. Brennan then warned that the terrorists may export such weapons to the West to make financial gains. The American official called for cutting off the supply lines for terrorists so that they will not be able to transport the chemical materials. Last year, officials of Iraq's autonomous Kurdistan region reported some cases of ISIL using chemical weapons against Kurdish fighters. And now we're joined out of Alberta by Mr. Anthony Hall, professor of globalization. Mr. Hall, your views on this revelation by John Brennan?
Well, this is coming from the CIA. This is a pure fantasy. We know that ISIL is us. ISIL is USA. So the idea of John Brennan saying that, oh my goodness, ISIL, this independent force, has chemical weapons that might be used. Well, that he would know. He's probably involved in the supply chain to get those chemical weapons to ISIL. We know that the United States provided Saddam Hussein with chemical weapons to use against Iran. This use of chemical weapons, we know the Ghouta attacks in 2013 were blamed on the Assad government, but it was all a scam. I would say that one possibility is by saying we have to cut off the supply lines for this smuggling, it's really trying to justify some kind of attack on Assad. And of course, the military operation with U.S. collaborating with Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, which it creates and helps, especially through Saudi Arabia. This is all a kind of fantasy that is constructed for American public, but the American public and the world public is becoming smart to the frauds emanating from the CIA, from the White House, from the Pentagon, and they're not always speaking the same language. Sometimes they're competing actually and clashing, and we have to take that into account too.
And Professor, this concern that the routes that the ISIL is going to utilize ways of getting these weapons to the West. I mean, the major route that ISIL is using to get either personnel or equipment in and out of Syria and Iraq is usually Turkey. I mean, and that's a U.S. ally. So your thoughts on that?
Well, Turkey is in such a strange position right now. Turkey is kind of using the uprooted people from the war zone as a kind of bargaining chip with Europe, saying, you know, we'll send these migrants to destabilize your country unless you let us into EU and such. Turkey is obviously, you know, a friend of any enemy of the Assad government. Turkey is also being exposed. Sybil Edmonds' exposure of what really goes on within the Turkish discourse, you know, is coming to mind. Turkey has a lot to explain. Of course, the major customer for ISIL oil. Turkey is really playing weird double games in the tradition of Israel and the United States, the Zio-American empire.
Thank you, Professor, for your input. That's Professor Anthony Hall, Professor of Globalization from Lethbridge University, joining us out of Alberta.